This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C-School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free Creativity Blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. In today's episode, I speak with Elaine Pofeldt, and we talk about entrepreneurship, becoming a writer, Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week, and how to build the $1 million one-person business. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor. I'm delighted today to be joined by Elaine Pofeldt. Elaine is an author and journalist who specializes in small business, entrepreneurship, and careers. Her new book, The $1 Million One-Person Business, looks at how entrepreneurs are hitting 7-figure revenue in businesses where they are the only employees. How do they do this? Well, by tapping into automation and other technologies to scale their efforts. Her work has appeared in Fortune, Money, CNBC, Inc., Forbes, and many other business publications, and she is a contributor to the Economist Intelligence Unit. It's my great pleasure to have Elaine join us today. So welcome, Elaine.
Thank you so much, James. It's really wonderful to be here.
So share with everyone what's going on in your world just now.
Well, I'm getting used to having a book out in the world and having it in the court of public opinion. It's been so nice to hear from people about what they're learning from the book, how they're applying it. And it's been an exciting adventure. I've been a journalist for a long time, as you know, but it's a little different when you write a book. So it's been a lot of fun.
So that's surprising. You know, people think I've seen your name around a lot in a lot of different articles, Forbes and Inc. So why is it taken till this point in your career to kind of get your first book out under your own name?
I think for a lot of creative professionals, we're a little bit like the cobbler who has no shoes. We're always busy serving our clients. And I went into business 10 years ago after a corporate career in journalism. I was at the time incorporated at Fortune Small Business Magazine. And when I started my business, my children were very young. I have 4 children, and I had 3 children who were ages 4 and under at that time. And so between raising my kids and serving my freelance clients, I just never had the time to do a bigger project like this. It was actually an accident that I wound up coming across the statistics that later led to the book. I do a blog for Forbes about entrepreneurship, and I came across statistics showing that in the U.S., there were businesses that were bringing in between 1 million and 2.49 million in revenue that were non-employer businesses. And that's what the U.S. government calls businesses that have no employees other than the owner. So they could be a one-person business. Most of them are. Or they could be a partnership, maybe like a husband and wife team or 2 partners that run the business. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting because I know a lot of freelancers and they're not making over 1 million US dollars. So, what are they doing? And I started playing around with the census tables, which don't tell you very much by design. They don't want to give away people's personal information, but I was able to see what industries they were in. So I wrote a post about that, and it had a huge response. People started writing to me and saying, I need to start a $1 million one-person business. Exactly what are they doing? Because I want to do it too. So I had no way to really find out exactly what they were doing. I had kind of gone to the limits of what the census data would tell me. So I wrote to the readers and I said, if you're one of these businesses, people are extremely curious. What are you doing? How did you get there? So I wrote an initial post where I featured a handful of the entrepreneurs who had written to me. And then it kind of took off. And over about 3 years, I was covering these businesses for a variety of different publications. And an agent spotted the coverage and thought it would be a great book. And I was happy to jump on the idea. It just was a perfect moment in time. My children were in school all day and I had more time to do it. So it just all came together nicely.
I remember when I first moved to the kind of Silicon Valley area, and this idea of like almost like the idea of a one-person business would be kind of seen maybe as almost like a lifestyle type of business, and it was it was looked down upon, I guess. And then obviously a number of things changed. It started to kind of change in the culture. One was obviously more millennials coming in and wanting much more freedom and independence in their lives as well. There's folks obviously like Tim Ferriss that we're going to talk about as well that kind of brought it into another audience at the same time. But I'm wondering, because you've worked from the side of the magazines as well, why has it taken up until this point for a lot of media not to focus on this kind of audience, these people that are actually creating great wealth and providing for their families and contributing to the communities, but they're not necessarily making the media's attention?
It's a good question. And actually, I don't see too many reporters actually covering the one-person business. I have a blog on the one-person business for Forbes, but that always struck me as I was reporting on entrepreneurship and small business, that mostly editors were interested in the scalable businesses. And yes, of course, we like to write about things that have impact. So that's one reason for it. It's definitely important to cover the Facebooks of the world because they're life-changing. They change society and we can't ignore them. And I write about them too. And I find them very exciting and interesting. So by writing this book, I'm not saying nobody should scale their business. There is an evolution in many businesses. And for some, it makes sense to scale. But what I noticed in covering small businesses and entrepreneurship, you're right. These business owners were treated as failures, almost like people who didn't read the E-Myth, people who can't delegate, people who need a talking to so that they will run their business the right way. And what I realized was there were millions and millions of businesses in the U.S. and around the world that were one-person businesses, and it wasn't an accident. They wanted to be that way. They valued their lifestyle. They didn't have an aspiration to run the world's biggest business or necessarily be a billionaire, but they were excelling in what they did, and they weren't unambitious. They were very ambitious about quality, about the quality of the service they provided their customers, the products they put out, and their life. They valued their life, and they weren't willing to just put aside all the people in their life so that they could focus 24/7 on a business. And they had other interests outside of the business, and they didn't want the business and work to be the only thing in their life, which is what happens sometimes with the scalable businesses. I mean, sometimes there's a season of imbalance, and then ideally the entrepreneur gets to a point of stability where they too, in a scalable business, can get back their life. But some people just aren't willing to do that. And they're very successful people. So I felt like this was a really interesting area. And what interested me so much was that we had finally reached the point where these businesses don't have to have marginal revenue. They can actually make a very good living and achieve the lifestyle that a lot of people want. In fact, one of the things that sort of sparked this whole interest for me was years ago, I wrote a story about someone who wrote a scalable business. It was in the area of private jets. And then the recession came, and I forget the exact details, but basically he had to leave the company and the angel investors had to buy him out. And what happened was the legal fees for dealing with this were so great that in the end, after building a multi-million-dollar company, he realized he had created a $100,000 a year job for himself during that whole time. And he became a one-person business as a consultant. And I thought, doesn't that happen fairly often? You know, like there's millions of dollars floating around, and then we see these stories of the business getting acquired by a big company, and the original entrepreneurs didn't become billionaires. They walked away with very little. And it just shows that there's upsides and downsides to all kinds of businesses. And so if you prefer the lifestyle business, go for it. But you might as well do it in a way that is profitable and beneficial to you. The other side of this whole equation is, we do see a lot of headlines about the gig economy and people being forced into being contractors and the types of freelance work that really don't pay off so well for people. And I would like to show people that there is a way to be self-employed and to really thrive and not be in a constant state of panic that a client didn't pay you on time. and you can't pay your bills every month, and you can't buy your health care if you're in a country like the US that doesn't have this nailed down. I know the UK is different on that front, and a lot of other countries are better, but we're not, and it costs as much as a mortgage in the US to buy insurance premiums, which people can't come up with a lot of times.
And as you were starting to kind of dig into the data and look at those kind of case studies, you found that there were a number of industries or areas where it is more likely to find these $1 million one person businesses. Can you talk a little about what your kind of research found? What are the kind of industries? Where are these people working that they're able to do these kind of numbers and have a business like that?
Sure, James. I focused on the areas that I thought were not only the most common, but also the most accessible to the greatest number of people. So the categories that I organized them into, these are not based on the NAICS codes that the government uses. These are my categories: e-commerce, manufacturing, informational content creation. So that's things like online courses, webinars, ebooks, things like that. Professional services, which is just traditional professional services, personal services. So that could be something like nutrition coaching, and then real estate. And these are all areas that have very high representation in numbers. And they also, except for professional services, don't necessarily require specific training. So for instance, manufacturing is a really interesting area that's taking off. And I recently did a story about a woman who is a nurse. She worked with new mothers right after birth and was doing lactation consulting, and found that a lot of the women needed added nutrition. So she came up with a type of nutrition bar that she was baking in her kitchen initially and selling to them. And then it took off. And so she wound up using a co-packer, which is an outsourced food manufacturer who makes sure that you're not violating all the food regulations in the country and poisoning people and that sort of thing. And I just found out that she got the product into Walmart, and she got to $1 million in revenue with no employees from her home. She's a mother of 3 and a nurse, no business background that I know of, and was able to do this successfully in a very short period of time. So there are a lot of fields that once required a lot of people that you can get into. And she's at scale. I mean, she's in Walmart. So she may wind up having to hire employees. I don't know. I haven't spoken with her since that announcement, but that can happen too. But if you run a good ultra lean business, then you have options. If you're running a marginal freelance business where you're always struggling, you basically have no options. You're just struggling, and your life is really not in your control. You're actually worse off in many cases than an employee because you don't have the safety net that an employee has. So I'm showing people in the book, I hope, how to create their own safety net so that they can cover all those costs of life, and they have options like reinvesting in the business, as I'm sure she's doing.
So I'm wondering, as you kind of were going into this, I know a number of my friends who are in that position of their one person businesses doing over $1 million. They're maybe speakers or coaches, or they have online products, information products that you were talking about as well. And they say that actually one of the things that they have to continually stop themselves kind of from doing is, as they kind of get over that level, trying to fill the void of, because they're able to, they've usually created their business, they've automated a lot of it, they've really streamlined it. It's a very lean type of business, and then they kind of like start adding jobs for themselves and tasks for themselves as well. I'm wondering, as you were interviewing any of these people who have these kind of same businesses, does it come a point with them where they actually have to go, actually this is enough? Yes, I could grow bigger, I could start bringing in employees, but actually I'm happy at this level. This is where I want to be.
Absolutely. And I would love to talk with your friends, by the way. Maybe I could profile them, because I am looking to profile more entrepreneurs in $1 million one-person businesses around the world. But there is an example in the book of exactly what you're talking about. Jason Gaignard runs Mastermind Talks. He's a Toronto entrepreneur, and he started out in a scalable business with about 20 employees, and it was a ticket seller, Tickets Canada, and just found that he was miserable. He had cash flow issues, a lot of personal stress. And what he found was that he scaled the business. The profits didn't scale in tandem with the revenue, which a lot of people will know in a scalable business. But as somebody who hadn't scaled before, he didn't know that. And so the second time around, he wound up leaving that business and starting a new one. It's an events business. So he brings together very high achieving entrepreneurs in these weekends where they get together and exchange ideas and hear great speakers. And he decided enough was enough, and he wasn't going to scale it. He's keeping it where it is. It brings in $1 million in annual revenue, but he's resisted the temptation. He had added a couple of events, and then he decided, no, I'm paring back to this original event. And he said, how much do I actually need? I take enough out of the business. I'm happy. I have time with my family. He has a young daughter. He spends time with her. He has enough. And he had to make that decision. He has a podcast now where he talks a little bit about that, where he's challenging the notions of scale. And I think it's an important thing to think about, what matters to you, because you can get on that treadmill.
Yeah.
And just keep on going and create jobs for yourself, like you said, but maybe that isn't what you truly got into this for. So you need a reality check, and you also need to create distance. So for many of them, meditation seems to be something that they do, or things like a sport or yoga, just something that gets you away from the business and helps you reconnect with who you are. It can help you to sort of do a reality check and say, hey, am I giving into this pressure to be the next Silicon Valley business, or am I doing what I want out of life?
It reminds me a little bit, we had a guest recently, James Schramko, who's based in Australia. And he has one of those kinds of businesses as well. And in that interview, I'll put on the show notes here as well, he spoke about, most people know the Pareto Principle. People like Tim Ferriss made it very well known, the 80-20 rule. He said, but what a lot of people don't realize is it's actually fractal. So it's actually 64-4 as well. So you could, the 4% of things you do can actually deliver 64% of the results. So he said he got really, really focused, not just on the 20% of things that were delivering in results and trying to move everything else out of his life and his business, but actually, what is the 4% of things that you can do that will deliver 64%? Actually, and 64% is good, really. So you can actually kind of go a little bit deeper.
That's great. I love that number too, because it actually sounds very realistic to me when you think about it. If you look at your own client base and your efforts, there are things that are very high value activities that will drive you forward. It's funny because Laszlo Nadler, one of the entrepreneurs in the book, he started a business called Tools for Wisdom. And what he does is sell planners on Amazon that are very much focused on what is the one thing you can do to move your life forward towards your biggest goal this week. And I thought it was a very counterintuitive way to look at your to-do list. And if you think of it that way, like what is the one thing? It's pretty powerful, because then it cuts away a lot of these obligations that we feel we have to take care of that really drain our energy, take time away from the people that we want to spend time with, keep us unhealthy and glued to our computer.
Yeah.
So I think I'm definitely going to have to read James's book, because it's been on my list, and now that you say that, it's going right to the top.
It's great, because one of those books, I got a copy of it. He sent me a copy of the book, and I think I read it in like 12 hours or something. And it's, you like a book when you see lots of marginalia, lots of writing in the margins as well. So, but I noticed that you also picked up a big following more recently, because you did a guest post recently on Tim Ferriss's blog. So Ryan Holiday was talking about you recently as well. What was fascinating on that Tim Ferriss, where you did that guest post, was looking at the comments in that guest post. You were obviously talking about this idea of the $1 million one-person business, and a lot of people kind of coming in and chiming in with their views on it. What has been the kind of reaction to this concept that you're promoting in the book?
I think a lot of people are really glad that somebody is writing about it, because they have realized they're doing something really awesome in their business, but they don't get the credit for it in society. People are, always paying attention to the scalable businesses. And I think they've appreciated that I've looked at some of the pain points too. I tried to be very honest, because I've been in business for 10 years and I don't want to be this motivational guru telling everybody that small business is perfect and you should do it, quit your job tomorrow, because that's not the reality. It really does take a lot of effort. It's hard. It has to be something that you personally want. It isn't always the right season to start a business in your life. And I want people to be aware of that. And if they go in with their eyes wide open, then they can really get a lot out of it. I think people with the Tim Ferriss blog really like the case studies because the entrepreneurs were very generous in sharing the strategies that they took from Tim's original book, The 4-Hour Workweek, and how they applied those to their business to create $1 million one-person business. And it was fascinating for me to see. I noticed a common thread in my interviewing of the more than 30 businesses in the book, my book, that they often said they were inspired by Tim Ferriss. And I mentioned that to Tim, and he came up with the idea of tapping into that a little bit and finding out, okay, exactly what did they use from the 4-Hour Workweek? So some of the comments that you saw at the end, people were saying they liked seeing those case studies because it gave them ideas for their own business. And I'm definitely going to pay attention to that because I do think his book was, at the time, really the first one that pulled together a lot of the strategies that they're using. And now it's 10 years later. It's just been the 10-year anniversary of the 4-Hour Workweek. We're seeing how it transformed people's lives and enabled them to create these high revenue businesses.
So I know that one of the ways that you kind of came to writing this book, what's brought you to this point is, I mean, obviously the layman happened. You were in corporate America as well, and then you moving into writing. You kind of talk about the idea of security for the self-employed person. This is obviously something that gets talked about a lot in the gig economy, where maybe freelancers are going there, but they don't really have a sense of security necessarily in what they're doing. How did you tackle that? Because I'm sure that's a question that will come up a lot from people saying, yeah, I'm working in this gig economy, but I just lack security in what I'm doing, and I don't know how I'm going to make money from 1 month to next.
Well, I think there has to be a change in mindset. The people that are sort of scrambling from one project to the next are at the beginning of the journey. And I was that person the first 2 years of running my business. It was just, one project to the next. And all of a sudden you realize there are certain costs that you have as a freelancer that you didn't have as an employee. So I don't know if this is true in all countries, but in the US, you have to pay both the employer and employee portion of your payroll taxes. If you do payroll, the healthcare is very expensive. You need a cash cushion to protect you in case clients pay you late, which can happen. I started my business right as the Great Recession was starting, and things were going along swimmingly, and then all of a sudden that hit, and all of a sudden none of my clients were paying me on time, and I had a family, and my husband, he was a freelancer too. He's a real estate appraiser. It was scary. It was very scary. And so I understand what that feels like, and feeling like it's not just affecting you, but your kids. Maybe you can go live in your car and eat ramen noodles, but you don't want that for a small baby, right? So, and even if it is you alone, you may not want that either. It's just a scary place to be. So I realize the need for economic security, but what I have found is I don't think that political leaders are really paying attention to how many people are now self-employed. And you have a couple of groups of the self-employed. One is the people that voluntarily do it, like me. I want the lifestyle. I have 4 children. It works best for me. I'm still able to do high-level work with the clients I love. There are other people that get sort of thrust into it because of changes in their industry, and they're sort of the involuntary freelancers. And I have found they tend to kind of gravitate toward contract gigs that are almost like a job equivalent, but with none of the benefits and protections. That's the worst place to be, because you're basically forced to give up all your time to the employer, but you're not getting what your colleague in the next cubicle, who is a traditional employee, is getting. And so you're being treated as sort of a second-class worker. I don't think that's a great situation to be in. The way you can make it work is diversify your income, so that you're not just working for one employer. And that might mean saying no to on-site work, which is hard for people to do who are used to getting up, getting in the car, getting on the train and going to a job. But if you can break away from that and feel like, I can work from a cafe, I can work from my home, I'll work from anywhere to diversify my income. Then you can have more income security, and you have more power and agency over your own career. It's not just you depending on them renewing that contract and trying to somehow scramble and come up with the money to cover your own benefits and your own retirement. That's not a good place to be. And it's one of the reasons I almost always say no to doing work on site, because I like to have a lot of different clients. I don't want to be dependent on one client. The other thing is getting out of the mindset of trading time for dollars, which I'm sure you've had other guests talk about.
And I think that's a hard one, especially if you've come from the being employed. That's how things are usually measured, unless you're working in maybe in finance or something where there's more of a bonus culture. But time for money, that's a dangerous place to be.
It is. It definitely is. So to break out of it, there are a couple of different ways. One is to really start to understand your value and quantify it. So if you are in a field where everything is paid by the hour, then you need to charge a much higher hourly rate. So then you need to figure out, okay, so how can I justify that? I mean, is it actually justified? First of all, you've got to work on yourself and be providing something that's more valuable. So if you're kind of floating by doing what you always did, that's probably not going to put you in a situation where you can charge more. But say you're just an amazing programmer and you decide, instead of serving the client base that I always serve, I'm going to focus only on finance firms that can pay more. And I'm going to charge $1,000 an hour because I have gotten so good at programming that very few people can do what I do around the globe. Then you can command that. Or consultants, speakers are like that too. Sometimes they're not paid by the hour, but basically it's a couple of hours they might be there on site.
Yeah.
So if you look at it, if you're really providing an impact, and there are many ways to do it too. It's not just the actual work, but it might be that you bring exposure to your clients. So if you're a speaker and you've got a huge following, and then all of a sudden after the speech you're tweeting out about the live stream and you're bringing 100,000 people to it. I mean, those things have value too. So you need to think about, where do you bring unique value? But ideally, you won't be trading time for dollars, because it's very, very hard to scale your revenue that way. You'll look for instance, informational products that you can sell where you've done the work one time and then you keep on reselling it to new people that will get value from it. Well, one example I wrote about on Forbes, Brian Dean was a freelance writer, and maybe this is why I related to this story. He was a freelance writer in New York City, which is near where I live, and he was doing one project after another, and he got tired of it, and he's young. He wanted to be a location independent entrepreneur and travel around the world. He lives in Germany right now, or he's temporarily living in Germany. And he started a business called Backlinko, and he wound up creating an SEO course where he teaches people a lot of the things that he was writing about and he was consulting on, but he can now scale his teaching beyond just what he could do one-on-one. So that became $1 million one-person business actually fairly quickly. And I think there are a lot of people in professional services and personal services that have an expertise. And if they're good at expressing it, or they hire a ghostwriter to help them, they can create a course. There are platforms like Teachable, where I see a lot of people creating courses. You can put up an informational product like an ebook on ClickBank, for instance. That there was an entrepreneur in the book, Justin Goff, who did that. He actually was working out with a personal trainer who had been in the military and was like in great military shape, and created this workout. And so they together created an ebook. And it was actually, as he described it, it was a pretty basic, bare bones type of book. They put it on ClickBank, but it worked. And they advertised it on Facebook, and they got very targeted in their marketing and targeted a demographic that they knew would respond. It was like midlife people trying to get in shape. And as you know, if you use Facebook, they have a lot of data on people, so the ads can be very targeted. So that did really well, and they got it to $1 million one-person business by tapping into that expertise. So even if you yourself don't necessarily have the expertise, you could be a collaborator with someone who does. that's a good option.
And I have friends who are in exactly that. I have another friend I'm thinking just now as you're talking that story who actually has, you know, a $1 million business, and it primarily comes in through ebook. And one particular ebook, like a $47 ebook, and he does huge numbers in this as well. And it blows my mind really when for someone myself, like there's a speaker who's traveling all the time to speak on stages, and he has a completely different type of lifestyle where he's able to spend time at home with his young family, but at the same time deliver all that value. I'm wondering, you know, in yourself and this journey you've had is from working in corporate and then you know, writing for a number of publications, and now being a kind of an author yourself as well. In this creative journey, was there a particular insight or light bulb moment you had when you went, okay, this is the direction I want to be going with my writing and the kind of work and my life?
Well, it was actually when I wrote that post that went really viral for Forbes about the case studies of the people who are running $1 million one-person businesses. Just from being a member of the business media, I had written so many articles advising people on how to scale and get out of the mindset of just doing it all yourself and being a one-person business. And I started to sort of disagree with that outlook as I was going along, partly because I became a one-person business. And writing that article was a lot of validation that there were other people feeling like I was, but also that we had reached a critical point with the technology that was necessary for people to really amplify their efforts in a way that had never been possible before. When I worked at Time Inc., I worked from home a lot. I had premature twins, and I worked out an arrangement where I could deal with that situation at the time. And I had a VPN line, and it was a really big deal at the time. You know, I worked there from 1999 to 2007, and not everybody had a VPN line. You know, now you don't really need a VPN line anymore. Maybe you do in certain situations, but I haven't needed one in many years. And now tools are available to almost everyone that can instantly help you create a global business. It's so easy to put up a website. We take it for granted now, but I remember when I first started my business talking with a client who needed to put up a small business website. And I said, look, you cannot get by for less than $50,000 to have a good website. And that is what it costs.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember those days when you couldn't quite work out why it cost that, but that's what it cost.
It was a labor in part, you know, because it took hours and hours for the developers to do the work and the graphic designer. Now so many things are so simple. So we have all of these tools. Facebook advertising is available to anyone, or pay-per-click on Google, or, you know, depending on your platform. You can put up an Amazon store as a one-person business. There were a number of Amazon stores that I came across that are breaking 1 million. There's financing through Amazon if you need the inventory. I mean, there's just so much available that somebody who's really smart and good at what they do can do a lot as a one-person business. So it sort of coalesced for me that people were responding so passionately to this, and I had been feeling it myself. So I just kind of kept going with it. It wasn't that I was able to sort of stop doing all the other things I do. You know, I continued writing about other things and doing other types of projects as well. But I started focusing more around this gradually until, you know, it became a very big focus for me in the past year as I wrote the book about it.
And you were talking a little bit about, starting to talk about resources and tools and things like that. Is there a tool or a mobile app like Evernote or Scrivener or something that you find really indispensable for your work as a writer?
Well, I would say Schedule Once that's an app similar to Calendly. If you use that, it's one that lets you share your public schedule with other people you're trying to set up an appointment with, so you don't email back and forth. I mean, sometimes I do like 20 phone calls a week or more. So for me, it can easily save 2 or 3 hours a week of time. I was actually at the point of hiring an admin to do this. And then I thought, I'm getting all these links from people and they work really well. So if I hire somebody to help me, it won't be an admin. It'll be a bookkeeper instead, which I did. Because you always need help, different things in a business, but you don't always have the cash flow to support all of the people that you would like to hire as contractors to help you. So you have to set priorities. And so my advice to anybody with apps is try to find as many apps as you can that automate the routine and boring parts of your business, and then bring in people where you really need a person's judgment. Where it's better to have a person. So you can automate your QuickBooks, for instance, or your FreshBooks or Xero by attaching your bank account, your business credit card, which will save you a lot of time over manual entries. But there's still judgment calls about how to classify things. And that's where it's nice to have a bookkeeper. So you're not online Googling for hours trying to find out how do you put this in there and watching videos on QuickBooks, or, it just takes too much time, and you could be doing something much higher value where you're putting forth your best skills for the business.
And I think things like artificial intelligence and so much of automation is going to replace, I saw a stat the other day that 45% of jobs are going to be automated in the next 20 years. And many of those jobs are those more routine type of jobs and things that require that. Actually, and also a lot of analytical, traditional kind of analytical roles will be going, which is why things like creativity and some of those higher level skills are becoming so much more important. So I used to use Schedule Once all the time. I actually use another system very similar to that called Calendly, but it saves so much time. It's wonderful, great tool. So we'll put that link down here. What about a book? If you could recommend one book and also one record or one album, what would they be?
Well, I love Traffic from the 60s. So I love Mr. Fantasy. I never get tired of that album. It has nothing to do with business, but I'm assuming if you're asking for an album that it can be music. I don't know what it is. I think the emotion in those songs is just very powerful, and I always love listening to it. And then in terms of books, it's really hard. I love fiction, and I actually find that reading other things besides business books can be renewing. And I love the author Amos Oz. He wrote a book called The Black Box that is just a great work of fiction. And, he brings together a lot of things that are going on in the modern world in his stories of people. So I would recommend picking that one up. It's not a new book, but it always kind of stays on my top 10 list. So I would recommend that one.
We'll put the link there for that book as well. So final question for you, Elaine. Let's imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and you had to start from scratch. So you have all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you. You have to restart. What would you do? How would you restart?
We have this wonderful world of social media now that makes it a lot easier. So I think I would start by asking for advice from my friends. I have just found in my career that people are very generous, especially in this world of one-person businesses. We're very symbiotic. And so if I needed to get started, I would ask people for advice on what I should do. And what I have found, that was kind of what I did when I started my business 10 years ago. I just suddenly was in business, and I just started having coffee with friends that had been freelance writers or were editors who worked with freelance writers, and said, what should I do with my business? What would you do if you were me? And I would recommend it to anybody. If you feel like you're starting from scratch, is talk to other people. It's so easy to reach out to people now too, thanks to social media. I meet people all the time who tweet to me on Twitter, and I wind up on the phone with them, and I think it's kind of like a minor miracle. We take it for granted, but I just spoke with an entrepreneur who was in Germany. He was a young guy who started a marketplace for bounty hunters. Bounty hunters are these folks who look for glitches in tech software for the big companies. And then the bounty is like a reward that, say, Google or Facebook will pay you for finding these errors in code. And it uses a cryptocurrency, and it's all in blockchain to make sure that the contract is, cannot be changed no matter what. And I thought, this is just completely awesome that we could connect so quickly, and I could wind up writing a story about him. It's just awesome. So don't be shy about reaching out to people. I think I would say that's really important to get over that, and also look to where you can bring value to other people, because the more generous you are with your time and advice and help, I think the better it is for everybody.
So what is the best way, if people, you mentioned Twitter, what the best way of kind of reaching out to you if people want to connect with you? Maybe we have someone, people listening just now that are in that $1 million one-person business and want to share their story. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, I would love to hear from them, and I would love to hear from people who haven't yet gotten to the $1 million mark, because most people are not at that level, but they do have interesting stories. They can reach me on LinkedIn, on Twitter under my name, Elaine Pofeldt, and it's on the show notes, but I'll spell it phonetically. It's P as in Peter, O, F as in Frank, E, L as in Larry, D as in David, T as in Tom, or maybe simpler to remember, they can go to themilliondollar1personbusiness.com. So it's the title of the book, all written out in words, not numbers. And there's a contact me box on that site as well. And I really do hope that I hear from you.
Fantastic. Well, Elaine, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today about the $1 million one-person business, which is out now as well. I wish you every success, and I look forward to this idea that you're really kind of promoting in the book, which has been around obviously for years, but no one has really spoken about it in this way. So I think you're doing a fantastic job in being able to get the word out. So thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing the story of your creative life.
Thank you so much, James. You asked great questions, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.